Hey, what's up everybody? This is Osterberg501 and today I want to go over some very exciting new information we got for Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, and that is the reveal of the main endgame activity for the game called the Chaos Chamber. You know what's more intense than a plain old dungeon? A dungeon that changes every time you enter it for countless possibilities and rewards. Enter the Chaos Chamber, the core endgame loop of Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. Within the mythical Chaos Chamber is an ever-shifting portal into a randomized dungeon full of unique variables, killer enemies, and methods to make your run more or less challenging depending on how brave you're feeling. Should you prove victorious, your rewards will be grand and your prowess may become the stuff of legend. So a randomized endgame dungeon that allows for just a massive amount of variety in the endgame content you're going to be fighting against is definitely something that I very much wanted for this game. So at their most basic, a normal Chaos Chamber run is a randomized challenge that should take around 20 to 30 minutes to complete. Your path through the dungeon goes like this. 3 randomized dungeon rooms where you'll need to clear out a set number of enemies before you could proceed. Then a mini boss fight followed by 3 more dungeon rooms, and finally a full-on main boss fight as a grand finale. Each time you complete a room that isn't immediately before a boss fight, you'll open 2 portals that give you a degree of choice over what you'll encounter in the next room. You have 3 lives to make it to the end of the dungeon, lose them all and your run is a failure. But don't fret, you still get to keep any weapons or gear that you picked up through the run. We have over 60 level layouts which will mix and match throughout a dungeon run. On top of that, all the many types of enemies from the game could show up, with up to 3 different kinds of armies in one room. There are also explosive barrels and traps that populate based on that room. Some are smaller, some are bigger. Our level designers went with what felt appropriate for each particular combat area. So they are definitely leaning more into the ARPG inspirations of Borderlands has already had with this endgame activity. So it's 20 to 30 minutes at a baseline. Most likely that will get longer once you get into the more difficult versions of this, and it's really cool how it's split up. So it's randomized between all the different tile sets, which is something you see with pretty much every ARPG. They will have a bunch of different tile sets and environments they create, and then once you go into specific endgame activities, it randomizes all of those different environments they've created, and you can just randomly get that. So it gives much more replayability and allows it to feel much more unique in every single run. And so essentially you'll be getting one of these tile sets, it'll be filled up with enemies, you clear out a certain amount of enemies, then fight a mini boss, then you go to 3 more versions of that. So 3 more rooms filled with enemies and then a mini boss. Then at the end of all of those, you face a full-fledged main boss fight. And this is really exciting because I'm assuming with this that pretty much any boss in the game will be able to show up. So the last part, it'll probably just take you to the environment that you would normally face that boss in. And I would fully expect them to be harder versions of the fights, possibly have invincible versions of the fights, so more raid style encounters once you get up to the harder difficulties. Completing Chaos Chamber runs is a great way to farm for loot once you finish the main story campaign, but it's even more important for those of you who are looking to min-max your gear and assemble all the pieces of your perfect character build. By successfully beating a Chaos Chamber, you'll earn Moon Orbs, an in-game currency you can spend at the enchantment re-roller statue in Brighthoof. Every time you use the enchantment re-roller, you're offered a random replacement for the enchantment effect on your gear or the option to keep the one you've got. By re-rolling the enchantments on your favorite pieces of gear, you can push their power even further by finding the enchantment that best synergizes with your loadout. Re-rolling won't take many Moon Orbs when you first start out, but it'll be exceptionally more expensive the more times you re-roll the same item. So again, this is some massive new information. So on top of all the gear you're getting, once you complete any Chaos Chamber, you get a endgame currency called Moon Orbs. Now this allows you to reroll enchantments on your gear. Now enchantments are seeming to be this game's version of anointments. We don't know if they're going to be as strong as anointments. Most people are hoping that they're much less strong than anointments because anointments ended up becoming much more important than the weapons themselves. But the big difference with these is you're able to re-roll them. You can farm up a currency to go re-roll them to be much more deterministic on trying to get the specific rolls you want on the specific items you want want them on. While moon orbs are an in-game currency you get after a Chaos Chamber run, crystals are what's most important during your run. You can pick up crystals in a variety of ways during your run, but the most satisfying method is also the most consistent, smashing a crystalline rainbow glowing die that spawns when you've completed a room and open the portal to the next. How many crystals you collect impacts how many rewards you can score at the end of a Chaos Chamber run, which we'll get into in a bit. So it's crucial that you snag as many crystals as you can during your run. You can amass bonus crystals by completing optional side objectives that are randomly assigned to each room. With a wide variety of possibilities, maybe you'll protect a statue of Queen Butt Stallion before it's defaced by baddies, smash up a statue of that villainous Dragon Lord, or keep a sentient fire orb burning by feeding it the souls of slain enemies. Ken's favorite side objective involves defeating enemies while standing on one of 2 enchanted circles that spawn somewhere in the level. You always have 0 crystals at the start of a dungeon run, and they don't carry over between runs, so use them or lose them. The more we get through this information, the better this system is becoming, in my opinion. So now we have an in-run currency called crystals that determines how much loot you actually get at the end of the run. And these can be gained by just completing all of the different chambers of the run. It can also be done by doing additional side objectives that can be in every single room that can change up your playstyle. And if you think one side objective is maybe going to be too hard, you don't have to do that to complete a run and still get loot. It just gives you the possibility of getting more loot if you go do all those side objectives. Over the course of a Chaos Chamber run, you might stumble upon some ornate looking altars that offer unique buffs called blessings. If you cough up enough crystals to activate the altar, you'll receive a blessing that applies for the remainder of your run, with subsequent altars costing more to activate as a consequence. Blessings are stackable and can be as straightforward as increased critical damage or ammo capacity, though others may completely change up your playstyle for the rest of the run. My favorite blessing to use is a melee attack speed and movement speed buff. You can just start running around and mashing the melee button to swing your way through enemies. Blessings to your passive skills can also be imbued by Queen Butt Stallion herself if you choose one of her altars at the end of an encounter. The 2 portals that spawn in when you've defeated a room come in 4 different varieties. A crystal die that rewards you with more crystals, Queen Butt Stallion's favor via a helping blessing, a great die that awards you new loot when you beat the encounter, and an added layer of challenge in the form of a new curse. The last one is perfect for those who like to live dangerously. Then they're adding blessings on top of all this other information, and this is adding in some roguelike elements, so you can use your in-run currency to buy blessings to give you different buffs that are stackable, and the more you buy, the more expensive it's going to be. So potentially at the super hard end game runs that are the most difficult possible, you may want to stack some specific blessings to make sure you're going to complete those runs. And then you also have a choice after you complete each room or each section of the dungeon where you can choose one of a few different rewards that we just went over. So adding just more variety and more player choices into the system. Curses are the polar opposite of blessings, debuffs for you or boons for your enemies that last the rest of the Chaos Dungeon run and can make it that much harder for you to survive. You'll have at least an inkling of the kind of challenge they'll bring. As curses offered are marked as easy, medium, or hard, by taking on a curse, you'll be rewarded with extra crystals in exchange for the amped up difficulty. And some of the easy curses might even benefit you if your build can take advantage of them. In my opinion, the hardest curse is Break It Up, which gives your enemies increased damage via higher firing rates and accuracy when they're near each other. Depending on the arena, it can be pretty hard to not have all the enemies clumped together. If you're a glutton for punishment, you can even spend some of your hard-earned crystals before you enter a portal to make the next encounter elite, which makes the enemies in the next room much more difficult. In return, the loot they drop will be improved should you actually manage to make it through alive. During testing, I saw so many people playing the Chaos Chamber differently, especially in the way that they treat the crystal economy. Some players can't just help themselves and want to buy all the blessings they find. Others don't use curses because they want an easier run. And like I mentioned before, the system just gets better and better the more I read about it, because this is essentially being turned into a full-fledged roguelike game mode in Borderlands. So now you can also activate these different difficulty of curses that make the game harder in certain ways, give different debuffs to you or different buffs to your enemies that then give you better loot at the end. This just gives you more options to play these differently every single time you go in, and gives the player much more choices on if you want to try to do it harder and possibly possibly fail, or if you want to go the easy route, do it easier but get the more guaranteed loot at the end. And this system is going to take a while to learn what's good for that specific build, because there's definitely going to be curses that are terrible for certain builds but are almost not a curse for other builds. After you've fought tooth and nail through multiple Chaos Chamber rooms, taken on blessings and curses at your discretion, and put the smackdown on the final boss, you deserve some worthy rewards. A wealth of treasure awaits you in the Loot of Chaos area you're transported to after defeating the last boss, with a chest full of desirable loot for the taking. But for dedicated loot grinders, the real Chaos Chamber payout might be hiding in the bellies of the spined, slightly disturbing rabbit statues that line their room. Above the gaping, pointy-toothed mouth of each rabbit statue is an icon representing a type of loot in Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. Guns like SMGs and assault rifles, wearable gear like rings and amulets, and so on. By feeding a statue some of the crystals you've accumulated over your run, you can make it barf up a random piece of loot from its respective loot type. Through this method, you have the means to chase after the best items for certain gear slots while enjoying the random madness inherent to the Chaos Chamber. Now you can target which type of loot you want without just farming the same boss over and over again for 20 hours. It's still somewhat random, but the player has some control on the kinds of loot they want to prioritize. And this system we just went over fixes a pretty big issue that's been in most Borderlands games that they tried to fix with the specific drops being on specific enemies in the world. So once you get done with a fight, and after you loot the chest at the end, you then can feed these rabbit statues crystals you earn throughout that run and get specific types of loot. So maybe there'll be a rocket launcher over one of the rabbits, or a SMG over one, or amulets over one. So you will get that specific type of loot, which means you have a much more deterministic way to go about farming the loot you want in the game. And this is a massive change, and this is something that I think has been wanted in Borderlands games for such a long time. And having it at the end of probably the most varied system in any Borderlands games sounds like this is easily going to be one of the most beloved systems in any of the Borderlands games. Besides all the loot spewing rabbit statues, something else you can enjoy after a successful completion of the Chaos Chamber is a victory screen jam-packed with the info that recaps your run. Here you get an overall look at the offensive and defensive stats, per weapon kills, war damage taken, etc., blessings and curses you took on, total crystals collected, and more. It also includes a quick overview of your entire character build, including your two multi-class selections, skill point and hero point distribution, and even the rarity of all the gear you brought into the battle. Perfect for an all-in-one screenshot to share with your pals and or on your socials. So this is actually pretty cool. So at the end, you essentially get a stats screen at the end of your runs to tell you your build, all the gear you brought in, all of your different stats, so kills, probably damage, all the currency you collected, all that type of stuff in one big screen at the end. And presumably this is going to show all of your friends as well in the group you're in, so you can see everybody's stats at the end. And I really like screens like this, especially being able to see how much damage or how much kills you got is a very good system in my opinion. So that's all the information we have for the system, and without playing it, I know this system is probably going to be really good. This is exactly the type of endgame system I would want in a Borderlands game. Gives a ton of variety, gives a ton of player agency to choose how they want to do that specific run, gives a ton of player agency to choose different loot types they want at the end with the rabbit statues, and overall just a very good system. And I've said that I think I'm more excited for Wonderlands than I was for Borderlands 3, and this very much makes that the case. But that's pretty much all I want to go over with the new Chaos Chamber system. So subscribe if you want to see more Wonderlands or other videos. Leave a like if you liked the video. Leave a comment down below what you guys think about this new endgame system, and thanks for watching.